Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Business Owners Series here. My name is Chris Law. What we'll be doing today is we're going to be discussing cybersecurity. It's October, so it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Glad you can join M&P here with us. And what we're going to be, our topic for today is what you'll need to know about the latest cyber threats, as well as reducing the risk and also cyber insurance demystified. I'll be joined today by my partner, Craig Burkart. We'll go through some introductions in a moment or so. Just want to go through some housekeeping items. This presentation will be recorded. A link will be emailed to several days after this event. We will have a Q&A for the last 20 minutes or so after this webinar. We encourage you to submit your questions through the presentation, as well as also, if you can see at the bottom of the screen, you can do that. We'll try to address as many questions as possible throughout the Q&A. If we don't get a chance to reach your question, we will obviously be providing some contact info so that we can follow up afterwards. Just some quick introductions. Myself, Christopher Law, I'm the National Leader for Incident Management for M&P Digital. Joined by myself, I have Craig Burkart. He's the National Leader for Insurance Advisory for Forensic Services. Prior to M&P, I was also the Western Canadian Incident Manager for a Big Four firm here in Canada. I'll let Craig give his intro during the second part of this presentation. So let's jump right into it. What we're going to talk about right now is giving you a quick overview of the cyber incidents and threats, okay? What's happening right now? In the last 30 days, M&P ourselves, I lead the team for incident response. We've already seen a number of different attacks. And it says right now we have a number of electronic fund transfer attacks through financial companies. These are obviously in hundreds of thousands, so 250,000 there. We unfortunately have seen 3 companies declaring bankruptcy as a result of ransomware attacks, and this happened over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And you may have heard about the various attacks in the United States where Colonial Pipelines, for instance, and others have paid in order of 11 or 12 or 15 million US, whatever that amount is. That obviously brings a lot of headlines, but you'd be surprised that in Canada, a lot of our mid-market clients, unfortunately, have obviously had to deal with ransomware payments in the millions of dollars. So it's not just the US, it's happening right next door. It's happening in our provinces. And so already there's been a number of data exfiltration from various Canadian mid-market organizations where there has been ransomware payments in the amounts of anywhere from 5 to 10 million. Of course, it's confidential. We want to make sure that everyone understands that it's just everyone says it's not just a matter of if it's going to happen, it's when, and something unfortunately will always happen over the weekend or it's coming up. Okay. So I get asked a lot, why are they attacking our businesses? And yes, we do have situations where there are environmental stances or maybe a political activism. But at the end of the day, 95 or 98% of these attacks are to do with money. So they obviously want to try it. The barrier to entry is fairly low. Everyone can basically learn how to take advantage of organizations that are not cyber mature. And then from there, infect, encrypt, and then, of course, demand ransomware payment on the information that they either steal or they encrypt and render your organization, enabled to operate. So really, again, at the end of the day, in short, it's all about the money. So ransomware, just a quick overview on what ransomware is. It's usually not directed towards you. It's specifically, basically what they're doing is through a number of different means. They're basically spraying or using a shotgun approach to attack and send these bad emails or other means through passwords or things like that that are already available, and just systematically, randomly attacking whole swaths of our Canadian organizations through various verticals, various economies. And so what they do then is whoever is unfortunately vulnerable, they take advantage of that. It's not specifically that they want to target your specific organization. It's just that unfortunately you have come up or you were vulnerable amongst hundreds of thousands, if not millions of attempted emails, spam emails, and or credential stuffing. And then from there, they gain access to perhaps a user's laptop. And then from there, they install tools to elevate their status. They look for what's valuable within your company. And then they either take that information, copy that data offsite, and then of course hold it for ransom, or even encrypt that data so you can't use it. And you obviously have to deal with them, and that's the intent. And so from there, then the communication starts with, asking for money and then releasing the keys so that you can decrypt that data. Okay. So what does every company need to do to obviously combat this? What's an integrated security plan? Number one, it's not having the best or most expensive firewall. It's really understanding everyone. We understand that doesn't have all the money in the world. Even the most well-funded, most cyber mature organizations, they are vulnerable. So what we need to do, we need to obviously focus on what's important to our business, what's our crown jewels. Everyone thinks that, okay, HR information is important. It is, but will it end your business? We have to look at ourselves and say, what is the one thing that will stop our business, ruin our reputation, and not permit us to, start work tomorrow? So we know we can't protect everything. We can't, it's virtually impossible. So let's make sure that we apply our precious resources, funds, and of course, our people into focusing on protecting the most valuable thing of our company. We need to find out what that is, and it differs from company to company, okay? We also need to know what information we're using. We need to know, okay, where's our data? Who has it? And then, of course, the final answer is, are we prepared? Meaning, with all the things that we put in place, if all our systems were either taken away tonight and we had brand new ones tomorrow, could we actually restart our business? Do we have the backups? Do we have the knowledge to restore our systems? This, unfortunately, is what happens to a lot of organizations. They unfortunately are not ready for this type of attack, and it happens every single day, unfortunately. So people then ask me, what saves or destroys their business? Now, number one, people say, well, Chris, what's the easiest way? I don't have all the money in the world. What are we going to do? Security awareness training for your staff and employees. It's the most cost effective, and it's always the first line of defense. It's always that human behavior that people take advantage of, the threat actors take advantage of. And so it's the most vulnerable, but if you train your staff, at least you can stop almost 50 to 60% of the impending actions. Number two, backups. It's boring. No one likes to do it. It's onerous, but we need to make sure that we test, we make sure we do our backups regularly. We test them, making sure they're clean, meaning that we're not backing up potential malware that's already on our systems. And more importantly, make sure that they're offline, meaning that we just don't have an online system that backs up at night. And what if that backup system gets infected? Then you lose all your backups. Number three, logs, making sure that once something does happen, we have the proper logs so that we can understand where the threat actor, what activities they did, what they copied. And of course, monitoring and preparing ourselves. We're doing this discussion right now. Hopefully, after this discussion, you'll be better prepared for an incident. And finally, don't make sure that you can't depend on technology itself. Make sure you have hard copies. Make sure you have offline copies of critical plans, contacts, inventory lists. I want to bring up one major thing that's growing, and that is you have your business. You focus on your business. Probably it's not cybersecurity. We don't expect it to be. We expect you to focus on your business and lean on others, third parties, to help take care of the IT, take care of everything else. And that's true. However, in the last few months, you may have heard of Kaseya and a number of other types of vulnerabilities with IT organizations. What right now we've seen in the last few weeks is 60% of the cyber incidents with M&P's clients have not been because of their own organization. They've done everything right. It was because they were infected, or it was the cause of their third-party suppliers. It doesn't always have to be IT. It could be, your financial system that you outsource. It could be a cloud, the cloud system that you outsource. So we need to be careful, and we need to understand that it's not. Sometimes we have to make sure that we hold our third party and our suppliers accountable. So how do we do this? We ask them for independent reports of their own systems, making sure that they follow, best practices in cybersecurity. We understand that what access do they have, and what clauses protect us. Best to obviously arrange this through the procurement process when you're first looking for or renewing your current suppliers, because as I mentioned, it's always going to be, if it's not you, it's all the systems that all the partners that have access to your systems. Obviously, they're trying to help, but more than likely they're a huge target for threat actors because they have access to thousands of clients and user clients. And what we've seen, unfortunately, in the last few weeks, as I mentioned, is a number of small, medium, mid-market clients. They've done everything they could, but unfortunately, because of their partners, their third parties, they had incidents and obviously had to deal with that. So how do we reduce the impact of an incident? So what I wanted to do is, people may say, okay, well, how do you fix an incident? What actually happens? So I just wanted to give a quick 10-step snapshot of how a typical incident is handled. Some of it's obviously to do with different things. Not everything applies depending on the severity and complexity of the incident, but I just want to cover each of the aspects so everyone understands. So first of all, obviously something happens, whether it is a business email compromise or all your systems have been, encrypted and things like that. Number one, I like to say, okay, number zero maybe is obviously keep calm, right? It's happening to everyone. Everyone has experienced it. If not, they will. And many have already, unfortunately, had it happen a number of times in different degrees and different severities. So we need to understand, okay, number one, do we have insurance? And I'll let Craig talk more about that. Making sure that insurance, we follow their rules. I'll just preface it by, because of the massive losses that insurance companies have had due to payments for ransomware, they scrutinize their rules as much more than ever, because of the fact that they of the losses. They want to, hold you or unfortunately, give question to perhaps the claim or the premium, because if you haven't followed their terms, they're obviously trying to find out to get out of paying the claim. So number two is obviously making sure that we have external counsel, and then of course starting the communications, making sure that we record everything, because we'll need that to play back. It's very important to understand what we did for further review that may happen later on. We may have boards, we may have executives. What we want them to do is provide support to the people fixing or dealing with the incident, but understand, okay, what if we do have to go down the path of paying ransom, right? We need their buy-in. We don't want them to learn on this job, like on the spot during an incident. It's a pressure-filled situation. We obviously, if that hasn't been done, we'll have to start to educate them and make them understand. So in peacetime right now, it's an excellent time to ensure that your executives and your board members understand what's involved. Make sure you take care of each other. That means everyone's on the same page, no matter what the root cause was or what happened, who pressed which button on that bad email, whatever. We want to be collaborative. It's a team effort here, okay? Now, what we want to do is obviously contain the incident, and that means understand where the threat actor or where the hack came in, and making sure that we get visibility. The person or the threat actor may still be in your network. That sounds bad, but really what we want to do is make sure that we have visibility to our entire network, so we understand where that threat actor has been, what they're doing, and then from there, what we want to do is make sure that, okay, they've done this, they've done that. Containment means that we haven't seen any additional actions from that threat actor once we have that full visibility for a period of anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. Once we have that, now we know how, hopefully, to block off. Does that mean cutting the internet off from our systems for a period of time while we, deal with the password changes that we like to do? Yeah, we probably have to do that. So that's containment. One thing that I wanted to put as number 6 is sometimes we overthink things, we overanalyze, we navel gaze. Time is of the essence. So what we want to do is when we decide on an action, let's follow through it. Let's be deliberate, and at the same time validate it. For instance, as I just said, sometimes the answer is to shut off the internet and make sure that all your computers are offline while we sort things out. So we say, okay, well, should we shut it off? Then we can't do this, we can't do that. We must be deliberate. Let's be forceful. It happens to everyone. Our clients will understand. Let's make sure that happens. And once we do that, let's make sure that we shut off all our internet. As an example, is we shut off the main corporate office internet, but we forget we have a branch office that has a separate internet feed, and the threat actor was still being able to access our systems. Another work stream that sometimes happens is we have a separate team that does malware analysis, that looks at the malware so we understand exactly what that malware is. We can't always depend on the internet to tell us, okay, we have this kind of lockbit malware, we have this kind of Revil or whatever type of malware. We want to make sure that we look at the variant, we look at what's attacking us, and we don't trust unless we can prove to ourselves exactly what it's doing. And then, of course, root cause. How did they come in? Another work stream is for us to look at how the threat actor came in. Did they come in through an unfortunate person who clicked on something? Did they use a password from various sites that have collected passwords from previous breaches, such as Equifax or Netflix and so on? And then finally, we need to make sure, or number 9, sorry, we need to make sure that we understand whether or not our data not only maybe has been encrypted, but has it been copied? What have they copied? Do we store a lot of medical information? Do we store a lot of PII or personal identifiable information or health information? Or is it just employee data? And at the same time, we need to know whether that's been copied. It could be used against our staff and or customers. So we need to know that. And then, of course, finally, what we're seeing a lot more now, everyone knows that certain companies have been breached. So what we're finding out now is that people are creating false claims saying that, hey, we know you've been breached, so therefore I falsify a bunch of my personal data, put it up on the, these various sites and say, I'm suing you now because you've been breached, here's my data, And so what we need to do is make sure that we understand what has been breached so that we can obviously quickly defend against future claims. If we don't have this data and we don't record what we've done, then we have to go through the whole exercise to prove this false claim wrong. That takes time, effort, of course, money. Okay. So just a few reminders as we finish off, and that is, the stress is real. We don't all need to be here. It's going to happen to everybody. And so what we want to make sure is that we take the time. It's part of our business process now. I don't think there's going to be very many organizations that don't use computers in one way, shape, or form. However, we need to make sure that during this incident, it will last weeks, if not months. In addition to that, some of the tasks may go on for years, unfortunately. But the idea is that we need to make sure that we don't stress ourselves out. We need to make sure we take breaks, we deal with the incident, but we also have to take care of our staff. We also have to make sure that our staff, or whatever the root cause is, let's say it's an employee that pressed that that phishing email, make sure that we talk to him or her and say, hey, if people make mistakes, we want them to feel supported. And then, of course, don't forget about your employees. We obviously focus on our clients and the general public, and of course our regulators or others. But don't forget your employees. They're going through this as much as everyone else is. And finally, you're not in this alone. As I keep on stressing, it's going to happen to everybody. If not, it's already happened. Don't hesitate to bring in the experts. Microsoft, Google, all these large firms, these cloud providers, they do have instant response help. At the same time, your competitors, more than likely, they're going to have the same or similar systems, right? What we're going to do is we're going to look at, saying, well, we had our systems hacked. You should tell your competitors, because they'll provide support because they know that they're likely going to be the next target, right? And of course, privacy commissioners, if and when we have to report privacy, they're there to help. They want to help you. It's not like, oh no, you've done something bad. This happens on a daily basis. So they will provide excellent guidance on what you need to do. Okay. Okay. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Craig for the insurance advisory portion of this series. Over to you, Craig.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Maybe next slide here. So we're going to briefly take a look at what is cyber insurance, some providers and costs, what might a cyber claim look like, and perhaps what should I do. Now this, of course, in the time permitted is very much a crash course. Each of these topics could spend a lot of time on that we don't have for purposes of the presentation. So we're going to briefly touch on these areas now. Next slide, please. So just briefly, with respect to my experience in insurance claims, done it for many years, both an accountant and designated insurance professional. And the one part I just wanted to highlight is the experience that I call on both sides of the fence with respect to being a forensic accountant for the insurers who are reviewing and looking at claims, and then a forensic accountant on behalf of clients and on behalf of those incidents that have the claims and are making their claim. It's very helpful to know the insurance perspective, viewpoint, and positions that they take. Next slide. So just briefly, before we look at the at cyber insurance, I want to take just a quick look at the impact of it. So business interruption is, for the most part, the main driver of claims. And loss of data, of course, and inability to access that data for a period of time can be a major cause of loss. The current average loss is $2 million. Now, that is a daily changing amount, and it's certainly very much an average from the extent of 100 million to far less than that. But the current average right now, 2 million. Next slide. So ransomware, which Chris was chatting about, largest risk relating to cyber attacks. Because it works, it's effective. It has an added benefit, if you will, if you're a perpetrator of it, is that you don't have to yourself worry about the data in terms of perhaps selling it or looking what to do with the data. You've simply encrypted that data and I want to get paid to release access to that data. Demands used to be in the thousands to $10,000 years ago, and we've seen now, not hard to see, very much so in the millions of dollars with respect to ransom demands. Interestingly, the average currently is about 170,000. Again, made up of some of those in the 10 to 50 to 100,000s and some in the millions. Next slide. So interestingly enough, when you break down the costs that are associated with it, and this is very much a rule of thumb, will not be true in every single incident by any means at all, but to give a general perspective or guideline, the restoration and expenses associated with the incident itself may be perhaps roughly equal to about the ransom demand itself. Whereas the business interruption that might be associated with that in access to that data is about 5 times greater, again, on average. The attacks themselves have increased since the pandemic by over 300%. So this is very much a growing area. And Chris touched on this as well, knows far more about this than I do, but this ransomware is a service model as well, and you can actually purchase the software to conduct ransomware attacks online. So it's perhaps not solely the realm of very sophisticated hackers. You can purchase that and do it yourself, unfortunately. So what is cyber insurance? we want to examine what is cyber insurance. And it's important to understand as we touch on this, that in the scheme of insurance, which has been around for a very long time, cyber is relatively new. So most forms of insurance, property, liability have been around for hundreds of years. Cyber under 15 years in the scheme of it being used. So what that means is it's not standardized yet. A cyber policy to a cyber policy is not the same. They're different. They're different by providers. They're different by what gets put in and what gets put out, because they're being learned over time. The other insurance has been around for so long, those learnings have occurred for the most part, and there's really tweaks to policies and tweaks to wordings, whereas cyber is not in that stage yet. It's new, and it's therefore all the more important to understand what is and what is not in that cyber policy, and how they differ between providers, because that hasn't occurred. I've heard people say that we're okay, or perhaps our property or our liability policies will cover it. Now that cyber insurance is very much in the mainstream, you will see exclusions. So do not rely on your property and liability policies to cover a quote cyber event, because it will be excluded, and you will not have coverage for cyber incidents through your other policies. So cyber insurance, first-party coverages, third-party coverages. So first-party coverages being like your property policy that you have are costs and losses that you incur. So you would incur incident response, you may incur a ransom and a business interruption. Third-party coverages are those that are claims made against you. So not your costs and losses, these are now claims made against you. And it's important to understand that cyber policies do cover both the first party coverages and the third party coverages. We'll touch on just briefly on each one. Next slide. So first party incident response. These are expenses associated with the data breach itself. So think of these as your legal cost, breach coaches, they're called, forensics cost of the investigation itself as to what happened, how it happened, and how to prevent that for the future. Data restoration itself, bringing back the data that has been compromised, notifying customers, public relations. These are generally defined as incident response. The only caveat I'll provide, again, towards my first point about the policies, is different entities or different providers use different words for these. So I've standardized these words, but it's important to look because there's different words being used in there. Next one is the ransom itself. Sorry, just a couple slides ahead, Chris, or before. There you go. So this one, not surprisingly, coverage for the ransom if that was to be paid, generally in Bitcoin, and there's costs incurred to actually obtain that, and to pay it and to negotiate it out. Next one is the business interruption. So that's when the system goes down, and you need to recover lost profits, fixed expenses that don't change even though your system is down, and extra expenses incurred during the time the business is affected. Next slide. So this is third party now. This is now claims that are coming to you that are rising from the potential transmission of a malware to a third party system, or your system now being used to carry out a service attack, or you not preventing others being accessed because your own system was accessed is security liability. The next one is privacy liability. This might be more of the personal information type thing, where sensitive customer information, employee information is released or put or made available, and you're preventing it to occur and not notifying individuals of that happening as well. So that's briefly the kind of the main coverages that are on there. And again, it's important to understand the words because the companies don't use the same words for each of those. It's not standardized yet. There's a bunch of add-ons or potentials that could be there as well that are worth considering. Reputational harm. So generally, a cyber coverage will cover you until the date that you're back up and running again. But as we know, harm's been done, and that may not stop your loss just because your system is back up and running, and just because you have your data again, and just because you've done it, there can be an ongoing loss. So there can be continued business interruption for that reputational harm. Next one. This one is called bricking, and really what it is it's just the hardware side of the cost. So generally the policies cover restoration of the data itself, but not hardware costs. And bricking coverage covers hardware costs if equipment itself needs to be replaced, like servers. So that can be added on as well. Next one, social engineering. So these are the compromise emails that occur. We get them all the time. You get them all the time saying the CFO has asked you to transfer money, please do so. And those are happening regularly, commonly, and all of your employees and people are getting those emails on a regular basis. So that in the insurance realm was called social engineering, and there can be coverage for that situation as well. One thing to keep in mind is of the policies that have a potential for a cyber-related coverage beyond solely cyber insurance policy is a crime policy. A crime policy can have inclusion of social engineering, but it's important to look at that wording and what it does and doesn't say in there, because insurers are often very cognizant of what it does and doesn't cover. So briefly, summary, it's designed to put you back into the situation you were before the event, however, within the coverage and limits in the policy. And that's why that matters so much with respect to the coverage and limits in there. So we certainly recommend that there's an expert who review those policies and limits that are in your policy. Next one is the providers and costs. I heard many people say that there is no cyber providers, or it's not available, and that may or may not depend on what you're being told by your broker. However, there is actually a large number of cyber insurance providers. However, they do change. There's entrants and exits in this realm for sure by providers, and they may not be all available to your broker. Sometimes you have to expand the search and have the broker expand the search so that they're aware of these entities that are out there commonly provided them. Some of them, some you recommend or recognize readily, Chubb, others not as much. CFC, Brit, some of those are, we don't know them as much in the North American market, but they're very much heavily into cyber insurance providers, where Chubb obviously provides all types of insurance to all types of areas. Now the cost side, this is always changing and highly variable. So as soon as I say it, I will deny it, because it won't be true, coming up very soon. But here's a barometer of where they're at, if you have any idea of what they cost. They're always provided in rate per millions in terms of costs. So some smaller entities that might be looking for $1 to $5 million of coverage, you can see there the cost might be $10,000 per million down to $4,000 per million. With the obvious that the more coverage you get, the less per million it costs, simply because if there is an incident, you're certainly making a claim on the first part of it and maybe not on the last part of it, because it may not be a full limits claim. So the more you buy, the less it costs per million. Larger entities that are looking for perhaps 3 million to 25 plus million in coverage for cyber, those costs are quite a bit more per million. So from 20,000 to about $15,000 per million. Be aware of the deductibles, exclusions, and sublimits. So just because your policy says $5 million or $2 million doesn't mean every area has that $2 million. There can be sublimits. There can be sublimits within the policy with respect to certain areas in there that are need to be aware of, in addition to exclusions that are in there. And then the last thing is to consider cyber incident providers. This is because in the event of an incident, as Chris knows really well, things happen fast, and you want them to happen fast too because you've had an issue. If there isn't a thought in advance as to who the providers are going to be and what that's going to look like, that can either be given to you by the insurance companies, but it's far better if you look at that in advance, and that you've had someone look who could do the forensic investigation, for instance, or who might be the breach coach. You will see if you look into these policies that there's a list of of providers of these things, but these providers can also be busy. We've certainly seen on recent incidents that there's providers the entity wanted to use and they didn't have the magnitude, they didn't have the resourcing to provide to the entity because they were already deployed on other issues and other incidents. So it is very important to be aware of providers and thinking of that in advance. So just briefly with respect to the claim itself, there will be coverage for the forensics and the response provider for sure. Other expenses, legal notification to your customers, your data restoration, those expenses can be high. They can add up for sure as they're necessary expenses, but they're relatively simple in terms of the claim side of it because they really just are invoice-based claims that occur. Next slide. The business interruption is far more complicated because the business interruption isn't an invoice-based side. It has an element of predicting the future, trying to establish what was there, what would have been there, what would have looked like had the incident not happened. And by its very nature, it's much more complicated to quantify and to prove what that would have looked like. So it's important to have reliable records in that area. Next slide. So I'm just going to touch on these. These will be in the recording of the session, but oops. Sorry. Is what to do, or a couple things to do in addition to what Chris spoke about in the steps, what that should look like. What you can do in advance is perhaps do a cyber insurance review. You can look at what's out there, what coverage should you have and what should it look like. You'd also want to quantify what is your potential exposure if something were to happen to you. That would determine the amount of policy or limit that you purchase. And then of course, when a loss occurs, we would certainly recommend having a preparer, which we do as well, of course, but to do the claim submission. There's actually generally coverage in the policy for those professional fees to prepare the claim so that it's prepared in accordance with the policy. So that's all that I wanted to go through right now, so that we would certainly open up our time for Q&A, for questions. I know that there is numerous Q&A out there, and we did just touch on it. There's far more depth to go into in each of these areas, but we wanted to give you some thoughts in that and some analysis in it as we go into the Q&A side.
Okay. So I guess there's a number of questions. We've seen some of them already. I think, Craig, there's some that perhaps we should answer live.
Sure.
I guess the first one is the obvious one. If the organization gets hit by ransom, should they pay the ransom or no?
Yes, that is actually a more difficult question than you would imagine. The statistics say, or show, at least to this point in time, that it's approximately 50-50. It's approximately 50% pay and 50% don't. Ideally, of course, you don't pay. Ideally, you do not pay the ransom. Ideally, it has less motivation in the scheme of things for perpetrators who succeed if the ransoms are not paid. However, when you talk to the organizations that do and did, it was for very specific reasons. So, for example, a university that was doing national defense work, and was doing work that was highly sensitive information, they may be more inclined to pay that, because that data from a national perspective can't be released. And it's very much an individual specific circumstance. There's not a one size fits all as to pay or not to pay. Ideally, of course, you will not pay that and be able to look at it, but it very much depends on the information, the system, and how you can recover from that.
Okay, thanks, Craig. I guess as a follow-up, I mean, the next general question is it worth it? Is cyber insurance worth it, or should they self-insure?
Yeah, given the costs that are there, it's not inexpensive coverage, as you can see, and the costs are, very much increasing. That part is true too. It's a relatively hard market, which means the insurers are costing more for their products. However, the question really is can you sustain a loss if it occurs? Given the magnitude of what happens in an incident, can you sustain that? If you look at your system, you look at the information in that system and how it's used in your organization, can you sustain that? Can you sustain that loss? You may be able to pay the expenses incurred to restore the data and to get back up and running. But what about the business interruption? That's the key part. If you lose access to that data, and even if that becomes available in 2, 3, 4, or 10 days later, what impact does that have? What impact does the loss of that data for that period of time have on your business and on your customers and your suppliers? So it isn't, again, unfortunately, a one size fits all saying no, don't ever. And yes, every single entity should purchase it. The answer is it depends.
Yeah. Okay. I can help take this one from Bruce Anderson. He asked, what are the increased expectations of insurance providers? What is the minimum that must be in place? And from my perspective, I get the top three. They say, Chris, we need to make sure that your client has the following. As I mentioned before, number one, the employees and staff have been given cyber awareness training, regular cyber awareness training. Number two, they have multi-factor authentication. It's table stakes for that. And then number three, of course, is clean backups and offline backups. Those three things have been reiterated to me time and time again from insurance providers, saying every client must have that before they even, discuss things further. So that's sort of the minimum that must be in place. So hopefully that's helpful. Other questions we have here. Let's see. Does our cyber insurance coverage for our third-party IT provider offer us the needed support for our info and data? Again, Craig, do you want to expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I can expand on that a little bit more. And that one is actually a very good question, because you can or should know what, if you have a policy, what is in that policy and what it does and doesn't cover. It's a little harder for the third parties. So you may require them to either have an insurance policy, or they may have it because of the other services that third party is engaging in, especially as it relates to the IT realm. But how do you know what is and is not in their policy? Generally, it's not being provided to you. It's not being given to you. You don't have access to it. They might confirm that they do have coverage, but you don't know what that coverage is and is not. And as we've discussed in our session here, it isn't standardized. One cyber policy isn't the same as another cyber policy. So it is an important question to ask in terms of that third party and the coverage that they do have, and it would be important to get them to confirm that coverage to you in writing, so that you have at the very least their statement on it and their conclusion on it, so that if that an incident were to happen and it didn't bear true that they had the proper coverage in there, you have have a backup. You're able to point to the confirmation that was provided to you from the third party, and therefore go after them if need be.
Okay. And there's a question from Karen New, and her question is, if 2 million is the average claim, what is the median claim?
Yeah, good question. As you can imagine, the data and information surrounding this is new and changing all the time, but it's also not readily available. There's not very many companies that put up their hand and disclose everything that happens to them in the event of an incident. So it gets aggregated, the information gets put in, but it also changes quite often. So the short answer to that is I don't have what the median of that claim is, and I think that will be very, very difficult to get or to have anyone provide the answer to that question, simply because it's not like a fire or a flood that is immediately visibly apparent that it happened to you, and therefore you can get all sorts of data associated with losses surrounding those areas. Cyber is not like that, and it's harder to get access to that data.
So I'll take on the next one also from Karen. Its follow-up is that with the ransomware demands, it's 170K the average. What is the median? And I guess I can't say for sure, but what I've seen in the last few incidents where there has been delivered demands, we've obviously, during the negotiations, we always ask, how did you come up with this initial demand and that, or the number? And right now, I wouldn't say it's a rule of thumb, but a lot of the threat actor groups have simply looked at and Googled your organization, and whatever your operating or general revenue is for that year, they take anywhere from 5 to 10%, thinking that you have that available, readily available. So if you're a 100 million, revenue company, then they'll ask for 5 to 10. And so it's pretty simple. That may not be true. So obviously, they just Google, they don't actually do any thorough research. They just Google your company first and see whatever the number that hits first is what they use as a percentage. So just to be aware of that. Okay.
And just to build on to that point with Chris, in our experience with the claims themselves and with entities, I think that's exactly accurate. It's less important perhaps what the average is, and more important that that's how it's being determined. It is being determined by a look at your entity, or at least your industry area, and picking a percentage of that. That's why the amounts vary so much, and why the Sonys and the Colonials of the world are $10 million plus, and why the universities started at about 20,000. They're now significantly more, but that's why they started. There's actually a logic behind the amount being claimed or being demanded.
Okay. So we have a question from Jean. Is there a training module that you can recommend to train staff on phishing awareness and general emails safety and awareness from a user perspective? Yes, there's many different options. There is a number of ones that I mentioned on the type chat, and that is KnowBe4 is one, Lucy is another, and there's obviously a number of free training options, including the government has also, the Canadian government themselves has put out a small business sort of page, and they're working on providing that kind of general awareness training. It's fairly simple, and it's not rocket science, and it's not like any specific option is better than the other. They still cover the very same fundamentals. So the most important thing is make sure that you regularly get your staff, put them through the paces, regardless of what options there are. So definitely the number one thing to do, and the most cost effective, really. Okay. So let's see what else is there. Are there any special considerations for charities and nonprofits? I don't know, Craig, from an insurance perspective, maybe you can start on that first.
From an insurance perspective, I guess what I would say in my experience, is that from a claim or from a demand perspective, the amount is less, simply because of the magnitude of the entity. The ransom is generally less. However, the impact of it is not necessarily, and that's generally due to the sophistication of the system and the data behind that. That can be very difficult for some of those entities to recover from. So, you know, that's an aspect to consider in that for sure. One other question that asked here of interest for sure is if you agree to pay a ransomware or ransom cost, can it come back to haunt you if the proceeds can be proven to have come from a threat actor or what the US and Canada may see as a threat actor, Iran, ISIS for example. And that's a very good question. Two aspects to that. One is first, overall, I've never seen that happen. Never, if a ransom has been agreed to have been paid, it was paid not knowing the entity. It was paid with you having zero ability to know who that actually ultimate asker is or hacker is, or who caused that to happen to you. You had no ability to know that information or to knowingly provide payment to an actor in that regard. I've never seen that come back to haunt a person. Secondly, as you can imagine, they're pretty cautious with that, and it's been very difficult to ever find out with any deal of accuracy as to who that is, as to who that money is going to. I know that just came out recently with respect to a ransom paid coming available and being put out, and hopefully that continues, and in terms of actually proceeds and recovery of proceeds, but that is few and far between of all those paid. Very, very few will ever find out who that is and where that went to.
Okay, just going back to that, Matthew had a question on based on the income rule of thumb. Does it mean that public companies are more likely to be attacked, and since that information is easier? No, the answer is we've seen right across the board private, public companies be attacked the same way. If they don't know anything about your company, quite often already we've seen the base amount has anywhere been 200, usually $250,000 as the initial ask if they know nothing about your company. So really it's not a method where it says, okay, because you're public you're more likely to be attacked. So that's the situation there. I did want to follow up with Linda's question on the special considerations for charities and nonprofits from the cyber perspective. And that is unfortunately because the perception is that you may not have the most sophisticated, cyber security systems in place. It is obviously there is a limit to the funding and everything else. But from a cyber perspective, it's the most important thing is your donation or your donors list or your client list, and what information you keep or store of those donors. And so it's fairly important to make sure that those may be your crown jewels. And so how you protect that is if you are unfortunately breached or hacked, that's obviously something that you have to focus on. Just as having dealt with a number of charities that were unfortunately attacked, that was their number one issue because they had to consider the potential litigation from some of these wealthy individuals that obviously provided and gave funding for. So something to consider there. Okay. Can MNP, from Brian, can MNP provide a list of any recommended cybersecurity IT special companies that could be used to help establish applicable controls and procedures? Well, definitely. I mean, we're here to help. But other than being self-serving, yes, there are a number of ones that are available. I think the key here, how to differentiate, is make sure that, and I'll be fully transparent here, cybersecurity is a very hot and very, very popular. Everyone's trying to move into it. All the traditional conventional IT companies that were just providing, network support, IT support, simple password changes and all that stuff. They're moving into cybersecurity because of the demand. I think the key here is to make sure that when you assess your provider, your cybersecurity provider, you look for the experience, you look for the reputation, and you obviously want to ensure that they have the full suite of services, because doing just specific one thing, as I mentioned in that slide where it says all the different 10 things that one must do when they're dealing with a cyber attack, maybe the person or the organization may not be able to do forensics or do dark web monitoring and all those other things that help bring the entire picture to light. So always important to consider that. Okay. Don't know if we have any other questions. Feel free to please type it into the chat. We'll try to answer online. And if not, our contact information is there. If you wanted to ask some more perhaps sensitive questions, we're happy to follow up with you directly on those. Other than that, we're coming up on time. So on behalf of NMP, myself and Craig, we do thank you for your time. We know your time is valuable, and we do thank you for participating in this session, and look forward to the next one. And again, it's October, Cyber Awareness Month, so please tell all your colleagues and be safe out there. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.